man, NSA can clone my phone. I will give them my children's phone. I will give them the passwords to every one of my accounts if it means that there's a likelihood that my family will be safer from a nefarious actor who's intent on hurting us.
You know, growing up, I always thought of the CIA as this shadowy, secretive organization. Shady people in shady places doing shady things. So, when did they become the world's biggest fans of podcasting? Forget all the secrecy, forget all that corny cloak and dagger nonsense. You know us, we're your friendly neighborhood Central Intelligence Agency, and we've got a lot to say. Now, from the content creator's perspective, I totally get it. You get to put CIA and spy and who knows what else in the title. Guaranteed clicks and engagement, right? The problem is no one should be listening to these people. As a matter of fact, I think it's incredibly important that we avoid listening to or interacting with the CIA, and I'm going to show exactly why I think that is. I'll begin with something that I think is pretty obvious to most people based on the comments on these podcasts, but it's worth repeating. There is no such thing as ex-CIA. This is not the day shift at Bob's convenience store that you just up and quit one day. The agency is incredibly selective about who they recruit for exactly this reason. They only want people with the right ideology to fully buy into the system and spend their lives serving it. You might not believe that they make these endless podcast appearances specifically to spread propaganda, but we do know that they are absolutely not free to talk about whatever they want, and we know that because of common sense, but also because they tell us.
That occurrence happened in about 2011, and I'm trying to go through a process now to get that cleared by CIA. Up until about 9 months ago, CIA was giving me the thumbs up that I'd be able to talk about it. But then geopolitical tensions in the world changed, and CIA changed their mind along with that. So
now, after gritting my teeth through many an hour of Central Intelligence podcasting, I can tell you that all these people fit into two basic types, and each of these has a very predictable list of talking points. You don't need to listen to anywhere near as much as I did to see the patterns and know what to expect, but I'm going to break each type down and show examples of the things they all say, and maybe even more importantly, how they say them. Of course, the full episodes these clips are taken from will be linked to the description, should you want to watch them for yourself in their entirety. Type 1 is what I call the old guard. They've either just retired after a full career and they're taking the security clearance they've somehow been allowed to retain into the private sector to do the same thing for way more money, or they've been retired for a while and they have a book coming out. I don't even feel the need to spend that much time on this type because they are, without exception, incredibly boring. They usually have one or two heavily redacted stories along the lines of, oh, one time I got a guy from an unnamed country to inform on this other guy, and the rest of the episode will be just answering the host's generic questions like, oh, what is training like? Or what is the selection process like? Any real questions will get a, I have no knowledge of that response, repeated to the point that it becomes comical.
That seems pretty dysfunctional to me.
Well, I don't get consulted on these sorts of issues.
No, but as an observer, like what?
So, you know, part of...
Almost without exception, the members of Congress who are the most vocal cheerleaders for the IC are the ones with the most to hide in their personal lives. And I feel like there's probably a connection. Does that make sense?
Again, I never saw, heard, or even, got a whiff of anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Trying to prevent certain people from getting jobs on the basis of their belief that those people will push for declassification. I think it's crazy.
For the people I knew when I was in the agency and the people I know who are still there, well, I mean, you get sort of, sometimes shifting standards on...
Tucker actually gets visibly annoyed during this interview, but I really don't know what else he expected. You're not going to get the truth out of a professional liar, and especially these old guard types have nothing to say other than the official line we've all heard 1,000 times before. If you do want to hear someone say, I have no knowledge of, and I don't believe the agency whatever blank, over and over, I highly recommend any podcast with one of these legacy agents on it. Even from a strictly entertainment perspective, they make god-awful guests. Some of the most boring conversations I've ever forced myself to sit through. Luckily for my sanity, Type 2 is more interesting, and I say Type 2, but really, it's pretty much one guy. You definitely know him. You may or may not love him, Andrew Bustamante. Now, to call this man prolific doesn't begin to do him justice. He's inescapable. He's Ty Lopez in 2015. 2015.
Here in my garage, just bought this new Lamborghini.
Go on YouTube and you will see him. Go on Spotify and you will hear him. Andrew is an agency poster boy for the digital age. Oh, you're used to feds looking like professional funeral goers? Well, here's one with a t-shirt and wild hair. Feds are well known for having about as much sense of humor as East German concrete, but our boy Andy has an outgoing personality. He's well-spoken, charismatic. Really, he's everything you don't expect a Fed to be. He's perfect for the job. Until you actually look for yourself, it's impossible to comprehend just how many podcast appearances this guy has under his belt. I bet if you started one today, he'd spawn outside your door like a Mormon. Hi, my name is Andrew. Do you have a moment to podcast about our Lord and Savior, the Central Intelligence Agency? Now, the thing about laying down this many hours of interviews is that if there are certain talking points you always bring up, those patterns become very obvious rather quickly, and our favorite federal shampoo salesman definitely has some patterns. He loves to bring up how America is weak and everyone should leave. You'll hear him say words to that effect constantly. Sometimes he'll even put a date on it.
If we're no longer the top of the food chain, then we lose that appeal, because now all of a sudden you need to have a Chinese passport to have the ticket. So our plan is that if that's the direction that it goes, we're leaving the United States. There is no advantage to being an American inside the United States if you can basically rebuild your identity somewhere else.
Interesting.
So we would actually immigrate, most likely to Europe.
Are you going to leave America in 2030?
I'm going to try and leave America in 2027.
I read that somewhere. Why are you going to try and leave America in 2027?
If I was my 11-year-old son, when I turned 15 or 16 years old and I start to really care about something, I would like to be in a place where I can explore that thing. I don't think that's going to be in the United States. I think that's going to be in Europe. I think that's going to be in the Middle East. I think that's going to be in Latin America, where he will have all the advantages of the world outside of the United States.
Why this is such a baked-in talking point for him, I have no idea, and I actually don't even want to speculate about it. I'll talk more about why that is later, but you'd have a hard time finding an episode where he doesn't say something along the lines of, Morocco weak, China strong, I'm leaving the country and so should you. Something that works in the favor of Bustamante and the rest of the federal gang is that for the most part, the questions that get asked on these podcasts are all softballs, right? They're easy layups that aren't going to make anyone sweat, and this goes back to what I said earlier about feds just generally being boring guests, because if you don't ask the hard questions, they don't have much of anything interesting to say. Again, Andrew is a cut above the rest, and this is why I call him the evolution of the forward-facing agency man, because he at least appears to be much more honest about why the CIA specifically targets and hires the people that they do. He's also much more willing to lightly criticize the agency in a way that doesn't really do their image any harm, but to the casual listener probably does a lot to sell the idea that he really is out.
It's fairly transparent. They tell you that you were recruited because you are a little fucked up. They tell you that you were recruited because of a certain psychological profile that makes it so that you pragmatically view things like secrets and lies. There's a few different terms. We call it moral flexibility. That's a big part of what I learned personally, was that secrets, how to keep secrets, that secrets are normal, how to lie without being caught. When you have moral flexibility, you take away good and bad. Everything just becomes a question of utility or productivity. If you need someone to do something and you can motivate them, then you should. But if you need someone to do something and you can't motivate them, that's a green light to manipulate them.
I actually struggled a bit to find any host that really pushed him on anything or asked questions that made him visibly uncomfortable. To my surprise, the exception was Lex Fridman.
I'm as alpha in everything I do as he gets.
Some people are going to say that this is fed-on-fed crime. Personally, I haven't gone down the Fridman hole. The only thing I know about him is that he wants to be seen as an alpha, and he appears to have the world's largest boner for Elon Musk. To his credit, he brought up Edward Snowden, which is honestly the first question any podcast host should ask a federal agent if they weren't by and large a bunch of clout-chasing pussies. This is a fascinating exchange because whether you believe Andrew is truly retired or like me, you believe he's very much active, at the end of the day, he is a Fed, and there's only one opinion he can have on this. The thing is, he can't just say, fuck Snowden, because if the mask comes off too much, it blows up his whole persona of, hey man, I'm just a friendly, quirky dude with big hair who loves his family and loves America, and I just happened to be in the CIA for a while too. No big deal, man. Instead, he attacks Snowden's character and tries to downplay the importance of his actions, and in case you need a quick refresh on Edward Snowden or somehow aren't familiar with him, he's a former NSA contractor who in 2013 exposed the secret mass data collection and surveillance that they were perpetrating not just on Americans, but the world at large. Some of the high points of this expose are the PRISM program, which gave the NSA access to user data from Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook, basically all the big tech companies by way of secret agreements, X-Keyscore, which among many other things allowed them to read anyone's emails as long as they knew the email address, Britain's JTrig group, which could use digital tools to change the results of online polls, inflate the view count of media they did like, and suppress media they didn't. Dishfire, which harvested hundreds of millions of text messages and stored them in easily searchable form, and that's still just barely scratching the surface. I think Snowden is easily the most important whistleblower in human history, at least for now, and as we listen to Bustamante's opinions on him, the most striking thing is how stupid he sounds. This is interesting because on basically any other topic, he comes across as very intelligent, but when it comes to mass surveillance, he sounds like a small child describing an imaginary utopia.
Some history with NSA and Snowden. What's your opinion on the mass surveillance that is reported to have been conducted by the NSA?
This is a topic that I never get tired of talking about, but it's very rare that anyone ever really agrees with me. Just so you know.
Yeah, a topic you never get tired of talking about, but you look like you're sitting on scorpions, and that fake laugh would make Jimmy Fallon cringe.
Bulk collection of data that allows for an expedient identification of a threat to national security benefits all of us. But people don't understand what they want. Like, people don't understand what the value of their own privacy is.
Andrew already sprouted fairy wings and flew off into Narnia there. The observable reality is that mass data collection benefits only those who have access to that data. That's why they do it. I don't know who needs to hear this, but big governments and big corpos don't do anything for the common good. He also fired off the oh-so-predictable, oh, people don't know what they want. It's condescending, but also just false. I think most people would agree we want government organizations to stop listening to our private conversations and then telling us we're safer because of it. The thing I always return to is this. The federal government cannot effectively put mail in my mailbox without losing or destroying it. If they can't figure that out, how am I supposed to believe they can perfectly execute way more complicated tasks? There has never been more surveillance than there is now, and I have never in my life felt less safe than I do now. I'm willing to bet that most people feel the same.
First of all, the fact that people think they have personal privacy is laughable. You have no privacy. The cell phone that you carry in your pocket, you're giving permission to those apps constantly. You're giving commercial organizations, what you and I have already said are less tied to ethical responsibility. You're giving them permission to collect enormous amounts of private data from you all the time. And do you know what happens if AT&T or Verizon sees some nefarious activity on your account? They do nothing.
As far as that first part, I completely agree. The fact that people think they have any privacy is laughable. So, what's your point? We're already doing it without your consent, so just stop resisting and consent already? Yeah, I'm not giving those apps permission. I'm being forced to do so because it's borderline impossible to function in modern society without a phone with certain apps on it. He also makes the claim that governments are somehow more ethical than corporations. Again, completely disconnected from reality. What matters is how much an individual or group of individuals is able to hold an organization accountable. It's much, much easier for me to hold, say, Verizon and Microsoft accountable for their bad behavior than CIA or NSA. I mean, what's the worst that's ever going to happen to them? They get called in front of the Senate or Congress, lie blatantly, and then go on their merry way.
So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Meanwhile, if I really wanted to, I could live without a cell phone. I am switching from Windows to Linux. I can opt out of these corporations, even if it's inconvenient. I cannot opt out of the CIA.
The general mass community really shouldn't have a say in what happens in the intelligence community. They really shouldn't. You have politicians and you have the opportunity to elect people to a position, and then you trust them. That's what a representative republic is. You vote the people in, you trust them to work on your behalf. They make decisions without running them by you. They make decisions that they believe are in the best interest of their constituency, and that's how our form of democracy works. We were safer. Now that we don't have that information, and now that there's this giant looming question of whether or not NSA is there to serve people or is collecting mass surveillance against all American people, that's not really a true, accurate representation of what they were ever doing.
I don't even know what to say to that. It's like he's reading from a Dr. Seuss book about how the government works. It is wild that he says the American people just shouldn't have a say in how the CIA and NSA operate. For one thing, well, a huge chunk of my annual income goes to fund them one way or the other, so yeah, I think I'm entitled to a say. Also, I think the main problem people have with these agencies is precisely that they operate with no oversight from or accountability to the people they claim to serve.
Now, I lived in the UAE from 2019 to 2020. Now, when you get your national ID in the Emirates, you get a chip, and that chip connects you to everything. It connects you to cameras, it connects you to the license plate on your car, to your passport, to your credit card, everything. Everything is intertwined, everything is interlinked. Every 50 to 100 meters, you cross a camera that reads your license plate, measures your speed, and if you're breaking the speed limit, it just immediately charges your credit card because it's all tied together. Totally surveillance. That technology was invented by the Israelis. When I was in Abu Dhabi and I was rear-ended at high speed by what turned out to be an Emirati official, a senior ranking official of one of the Emirates. It was caught on camera. His ID was registered. My ID was registered. Everything was tied back to our IDs. The proof and the evidence was crystal clear. Even still, he was Emirati, I was not. So when I went to the police station to file the complaint, it was something that nobody was comfortable with because, generally speaking, Emiratis don't accept legal claims against their own from foreigners. But the difference was that I was an American and I was there on a contract supporting the Emirati government. So I had these different variances, right? Long story short, in the end, the surveillance state is what made sure that justice was played, because the proof was incontrovertible.
So there he glazes the UAE and tries to use a singular and very selfish example to justify the hellish dystopia they've got going on over there. But in doing so, he accidentally dunks on his own argument and shows how this type of authoritarian control only benefits those at the top. In his own words, despite the unreal level of surveillance present, the only reason he got justice from this member of the elite class was because he was working for the government. So you weren't protected by government surveillance. You were protected by government connections.
Do you think Edward Snowden is a criminal or a hero?
In terms, in the eyes of the law, he's a criminal. He broke the law. He broke the confidence. He was under security obligation. And then when he ran away to all of the worst villains in the world from the U.S. perspective to basically seek protection. That how you act in the face of accusation is in essence part of the case that you build for yourself. So running away to China, Russia, Cuba, that just paints a very negative picture that does not suggest that you were doing anything that was ethical and upright and in favor of the American people if you're going to run to American enemies to support yourself.
Of course. How absolutely shocking that he fled to countries that wouldn't allow him to be extradited by the same organizations he had just exposed for nefarious activity. I'm sure he would have gotten good treatment and a fair trial if he'd stayed in the US. Think of it this way. Compared to Snowden, Epstein had more or less infinitely more money, connections, and influence. He couldn't even survive long enough to have a trial. But yeah, Snowden should totally have stuck around just to prove to Andrew that he wasn't a criminal.
In the eyes of a group of people who are largely ignorant to what they lost, to them, he's a hero. To me, he's just kind of a sad case. His life is ruined. His family name is tarnished.
I'm not sure his name is tarnished. I think The case you're making is a difficult case to make. And so I think his name represents fighting one man. It's like Tiananmen Square standing before the tank. It's like one man fighting the government. And I think that there is some aspect to which, taking that case aside, that is the American spirit, which is hold the powerful accountable.
I can't imagine being in the CIA and saying someone else's name is tarnished. Be that as it may, Fridman made some good points there, and I'll just follow that up by questioning Andrew's narrative that it's just a small group of ignorant weirdos that appreciate what Snowden did. I follow politics as little as possible because I just find it incredibly depressing, but I would bet that most people see the value in Snowden's actions, regardless of political affiliation. In fact, if you put a gun to my head and forced me to pick one thing that a student at Berkeley and a Midwest farmer could agree on, this would be high on the list.
There's a reason that Edward Snowden needs to do something new every 16 or 18 months to remain relevant, right? Because if he didn't, he would just be forgotten. Because he was not a maverick who changed history for the better. To some people, he is a hero. To other people, he is a criminal. But to the vast majority, he's just a blip on a radar of their everyday life that really makes no difference to them at all.
Like I said earlier, Bustamante falls all over himself trying to downplay Snowden's impact and basically calls him an attention whore who ultimately won't matter on the stage of history. Besides being, well, observably false, that also just comes off more than a little jealous sounding. I mean, place your bets. Who do you think will be remembered in 100 years? The CIA's pet podcast guest, or this guy? I know where my money's at. It is interesting to watch what I believe is an intelligence mouthpiece having to answer some harder questions for a change, but I still don't think anyone should listen to these people. And now that I've made a video hopefully explaining why, I don't intend to ever click on another one. I know some people who agree with me that Bustamante is an active asset will still say, "No man, I need to keep listening so I can detect their plans." Obviously, you can do that if you want, but I would ask one question. Has the federal government spent millions of dollars training you to be the world's most effective liar? For my part, I just don't believe that the CIA protects me or the American people. I don't believe it serves the purpose it was created for, and I think its power, purview, and funding should be massively scaled back. But there are now some searching questions that need to be answered. I, therefore, would like to see the CIA be restored to its original assignment as the intelligence arm of the president, and that whatever else it can properly perform in that special field, and that its operational duties be terminated or properly used elsewhere. We have grown up as a nation, respected for our free institutions, and for our ability to maintain a free and open society. There is something about the way the CIA has been functioning that is casting a shadow over our historic position, and I feel that we need to correct it. That was from an op-ed published in the Washington Post in 1963, written by none other than former President Harry Truman. 16 years earlier, he had signed the National Security Act, effectively creating the CIA. Coincidentally, this opinion piece was published exactly a month after the death of another U.S. president.
So, do you think the CIA had a hand in the assassination of JFK?
I cannot imagine in any reasonable point of view that the organization of CIA had anything to do with the assassination of JFK. The vast majority of people out there are what I call bobbleheads.